I now call the member for Solomon.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak to the Australian Citizenship Amendment Defence Families Bill 2012, a bill which seeks to recognise the partners and dependents of those members of our Australian Defence Force, or the ADF as we know it, enlisted through lateral transfer measures in terms of their eligibility for the Australian citizenship. Lateral transfer members help to fill critical gaps within the ADF workforce. They bring skills and experience, enabling them to hit the ground running and thus afford the ADF an opportunity to utilise these skills and experience without the cost and delay of training an individual from scratch. Lateral transfers and the practice of recruiting experience is not a new phenomenon. In this day and age, it's just one avenue or tool to which the employer organisation may access when looking to recruit new staff. In the case of our ADF, they seek to recruit up to 300 lateral transfer personnel each year. This number is, of course, entirely at the prerogative of the ADF, but importantly, it must be noted that 90% of the ADF lateral transfer members have families which also move to Australia. The Australian Citizenship Act requires that all lateral transfer members must qualify for permanent residency visas before they can take up a position with the ADF and therefore move to Australia. Simply this ensures permanent residency is in place, a prerequisite to citizenship and compliance with Section 21(2)(c) and Section 23 of the Australian Citizenship Act 2007, where a permanent resident may be granted citizenship after completing 90 days permanent service in the ADF or 180 days service in the reserves. Sadly, at present, the provisions for early citizenship as outlined in the Act do not include the spouse or partner of an ADF member. Amendments to this Act designing to bring assurance to those who may be a spouse or partner in terms of citizenship is welcomed and supported. Now let me quantify the importance of these amendments. I refer to our Australian Defence Force in my opening comments. Australian Defence personnel who, as military representatives of this country, are at times deployed offshore in response to the needs of Australia and the broader global military representation. We expect that these people serving within the ranks of the ADF and who undertake the rigours and dangers associated with that calling are Australian by law. Yet, in the same breath, we have been unwilling to afford the same level of acceptance and compliance to citizenship responsibilities for partners, spouses and immediate families of those members. Darwin is home for an extensive number of the ADF personnel, including their partners, spouses and families. And it is my experience that those partners, spouses and families underpin and provide a solid foundation in our community, a foundation which supports and enables the very efforts we as Australians expect from those within our ADF ranks. Now, in many respects, those who partner and are family to serving ADF members are not acknowledged when we talk of the ADF. We forget the significant impost to them. We forget the emptiness that they feel. We don't see the loneliness that they endure, nor do we see the significant impact on family with all that is required of those that fill our ADF ranks. Additionally, we don't see the pain when the ADF members are injured or killed in the line of duty. Yes, we see the media reports, and yes, we see the pain for that fleeting moment as we watch television and have the coverage of a grieving family, but we don't see the depth of that pain or the extent of that pain. We don't see what happens to the family, to that spouse or dependent beyond the evident in that fleeting TV coverage of loss. Mr Deputy Speaker, there are ADF lateral transfer members on deployment. Based upon the Australian Citizenship Act as it stands, sadly, if one such member should be killed, there is no guarantee that their spouses or dependents would be able to stay in Australia or have access to the benefits normally payable to the spouse and dependents of an Australian ADF member. That, of course, is the worst case. I do acknowledge the government has made assurances to provide support in such circumstances. However, little comfort to families without the surety of legislative compliance. Now, beyond the worst case, we fail to acknowledge the importance of the support provided to a member of the ADF by a spouse and dependents. We don't take for granted the same importance of our own families hold for us against the backdrop of a life in politics. We in this place are subject to the rigours of parliamentary obligations, be that sitting days, committee obligations, or travel within our own electorates as examples. Our own dependents left to deal with many of the day-to-day obstacles of life without immediate access to us. We identify and acknowledge the additional pressures on our loved ones as a result of the roads we travel. Yet, for the dependents of many ADF personnel, their lives can be far more complicated, far more impacted, and often with little support in terms of access to family and friends. Long periods of deployment with regular moves or transfers around the country, irregularity in schooling, in government services and entitlements are just some of the difficulties they face. Now, more fundamentally, the ability for a spouse or dependent to share those important and life-giving moments, to share the development of a relationship, of a family, or the capacity to provide some balance and normality to a child's life. To quantify further, the spouse and dependents of ADF lateral transfer members have the additional disadvantage of being away from a country that was once home, a place where there was familiarity existed, stability, and no networks of friends, family and services to tap into. I witness these issues on a daily basis. I feel for those partners and dependents left behind, and I see the impacts. Based upon the current situation, dependents of ADF lateral transfer members as a permanent resident, they are not eligible for the university help-based placement and additional financial impost. Divorce rates and family breakdowns within the ADF are above the national average. Not surprising given the realities of life as an ADF spouse, partner or dependent. The current Act as it stands provides no security for citizenship or access to government support in the event of divorce to the spouse of an ADF lateral transfer member. Highlighting the value of the amendments provided within this bill, I support the amendments afforded by this bill to the Australian Citizenship Act, ensuring that partners and dependents of ADF lateral transfer members are eligible for Australian citizenship at the same time as the serving member is in my mind clear recognition at last of the true value that should have been afforded to these people when the Act was originally progressed to recognise the ADF lateral transfer members. Yet, for the support I verbalise, I am unable to simply fold my speech and now sit down, not without addressing a couple of issues which remain outstanding in my mind. I remain a little perplexed that on the 21st of May this year the Coalition introduced a near identical bill. This bill, aside from a few minor changes, remains essentially the same. I'm unclear, unless for political point scoring by the government, why the Coalition bill could not simply have been agreed to in a bipartisan manner with the inclusion of the amendments as contained within this bill. Additionally, the introduction of this bill on 22nd of May comes some 12 months after the Minister for Immigration, Chris Bowen, wrote to the Minister for Defence Personnel, Warren Snowden, on the 4th of February 2011 and stated in the second to last paragraph of his letter response, "I do not consider it necessary to amend the citizenship legislation." And it comes one day after the coalition bill was introduced. It is clear that the spirit underlying these amendments demonstrate that both sides of this House recognise the current limitations and have sought in an almost identical manner to address. It's a pity a more direct and cohesive parliamentary process could not have been achieved, and that's very disappointing. But I commend the bill to the House, and I would like to also acknowledge the work that the member for Fadden had in bringing his bill to this House. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker.